But know that while the stumbling of the Jews contributed to the salvation of the Gentiles, we see that it is the salvation of the Gentiles that will be something to contribute to the salvation of the Jews. Paul seems to allude to this in the latter part of verse 11 as he says, "Rather through their trespass, salvation has come to the Gentiles so as to make Israel jealous." In other words, we see that one of the purposes of Gentiles experiencing salvation is to provoke the Jews to jealousy. And the idea that Paul seems to be conveying in Romans 11 is that it is the reality of the Gentiles experiencing salvation and all its privileges that would tend to stir up in the Jews a sense of jealousy and emulation. When the Jews would learn of the salvation of the Gentiles and the privileges they would enjoy, the Jews would likely be reminded of their own privileges in the past, their exclusive favor they had with Yahweh. And it is that those thoughts and memories and that knowledge that they had was to goad them into desiring to experience such favor again. And this is one of the reasons Paul desired the gospel to be preached and received by the Gentiles. As we read in verse 13 and 14, Romans 11, he says, "Now I am speaking to you Gentiles, inasmuch then as I am an apostle to the Gentiles. I magnify my ministry in order somehow to make my fellow Jews jealous and thus save some of them." Of course, Paul desired the salvation and eternal well-being of the Gentiles, but he saw their salvation as something that by the power of Yahweh would be used to awaken the Jews a zeal for Christ, to experience spiritual blessings once again, namely experiencing eternal salvation itself. In addition to the fact that there were many Jews throughout history that have been provoked to emulation, we know that one day, according to the Bible, the Jews as a nation will turn back to Jehovah. It appears that one of the things which will contribute to them turning back to Yahweh is the salvation of the Gentiles. This seems to be alluded to in verses 25 to 26 in Romans 11. As Paul says, "Lest you be wise in your own sight, I do not want you to be unaware of this mystery, brothers. A partial hardening or blindness has come upon Israel, till the fullness of the Gentiles come in. And in this way all Israel will be saved. As it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion, and he will banish ungodliness from Jacob." Paul seems to be implying that this partial hardening or blindness that had come upon Israel will come to an end around the time of the fullness of the Gentiles coming in. It seems he is also implying that the removal of this blindness may be due to the fullness of the Gentiles coming in. But what exactly is the fullness of the Gentiles coming in referring to? I would submit that it is referring to the salvation of the Gentiles at the rapture. But that while we often speak of someone becoming born again and being justified in this life as salvation, we must remember the Bible speaks of salvation in a future tense as well, namely the salvation that occurs when Christ comes for his people and catches them off the earth. And is this salvation of the Gentiles that occurs at the rapture that may be one of the primary means which Yahweh uses to bring the Jews to their spiritual senses. This would seem to be implied by Paul's words in Romans 11, for he speaks of the time in which Israel will have their blindness removed as being the time when the fullness of the Gentiles comes in.